and some of them are excellent. But the problem I have with this is that I feel like there's not enough diversity right now in the games industry, and this is something that really needs to change if video games are going to get on the same level as a lot of other mediums. That's kind of where we need to be. And the way that's going to happen is by new voices coming into video games, and people who are bringing something different or their own personal tales or whatever it is you have in you that you want to express. Everyone has something, at least one story they want to tell. And using it as games, I think games are a wonderful medium for expression, and I think so. My hope is that more new voices will come into the medium and make it better than what we have right now. And in fact, I believe tomorrow Terry Kavanagh is going to be doing a talk about some of the work that people have already been doing about bringing new voices to the games industry. He's going to be, I don't know exactly, I don't want to spoil his talk, but I think he's going to be demonstrating some interesting stuff, so do go along to that tomorrow. Anyway, so where are these new voices going to come from? I hope that's you people. And I feel like the good news I'm going to here to bring you today is that you can make video games. Now, you may think you probably can't, but I am here to try and convince you that that's not the case. Now, I'm not saying if you've never made a game before, you're going to go out there and make the most epic, amazing thing that you've ever imagined and never dreamed of. But you've got to start somewhere. Like nobody who's a really good artist starts by drawing their masterpiece with the first time they put pen to paper. And so what the idea is that I want to encourage you guys to try making games yourself. Even if the first stuff you make is like the equivalent of a sketch, it's really rough, it's really uninteresting to you at least. But I think that getting started will put you on a path where you can eventually learn the skills you need to express yourself in a way that is meaningful and can allow you to connect with others. And I think that's the point, is that even while you're still doing your early stuff that's not so amazing, it's a worthwhile form of expression, and hopefully will embolden you to keep going and do better and better things. So if you're here and you are interested in making games and you're doing so already, I would suppose you probably have a bunch of reservations in your head about why you think you can't do it. I think the key one that comes up the most is people saying that they can't code. And I wouldn't worry about that too much. I am actually a pretty terrible programmer, and right now I'm making a living making games, so if I can do it, I think you guys can probably get away with it too. I'll talk about some tools in a bit about how you can get around that if that's your sticking point. The other main sticking point I hear a lot is that people say, I'm more an ideas guy. I've got some great ideas for games and I just need someone to make them. Now, I hate to be harsh, but if you're an ideas guy, you're essentially nothing, because everybody who is involved in the games industry, whether they're making Call of Duty or whatever, everyone involved has tons of ideas for games that they haven't been able to make. And what really makes games interesting is not the idea, but it's the implementation. It's the way you take a simple idea and express it yourself that makes an interesting game. Because you can give the same idea to 100 developers and they will all make a different idea of a game. In fact, if you've ever heard of game jams, a lot of those come from the idea they give you a simple concept and then just see which direction people take it. So my point is, if you're just sitting there thinking, I know I want to come up with game ideas and get someone else to make them, forget it. You've got to have to be the guy who's going to actually make the games. And so what I want to do is start by giving you a bunch of... That's fine.
Sorry about this.
Not a problem. So I want to start by giving you a few tips about getting into games, and then afterwards I will talk about the tools and things you can use. So my main tips about people who are just starting making games, number one is don't waste money. When you're approaching any new hobby, whether it's making video games or especially seeing a lot in photography, there's a huge temptation to throw huge amounts of money at the problem and think that if you spend more, you'll get better equipment and you'll get better at it. In video games, people buy lots of software, buy lots of books, but actually the tools and resources you need to learn how to make video games are all available on the internet and they're all available for free. There are things worth buying maybe, but while you're starting out, don't think that that's the answer. Don't waste lots of money at the problem. Just look for the right resources and tools, and again, I'll try and point you to some useful resources, and again, ask me questions if there's other things you're specifically looking for. My next tip is don't form teams. Now this is received wisdom, is that if you're making a video game, you need a programmer, a designer, an artist, a sound guy, and actually if you're starting out, you can do everything yourself. If you've got a friend you already work with, you have a good relationship, sure, work with them, but don't go on a recruitment drive, don't set up a website and start hiring, because if you look around the internet, it's littered with all these amazing projects where people have sort of come together to form a team and then found that actually people have other real life responsibilities and you can't rely on them, and you don't want that to be the blocker that stops you from getting started making games. It's much more important to try and figure out what you can do yourself. And I think that way anyway, is if you do want to work with people later, it's going to be easy to convince them that you're worth working with if you can already show them the things you've made. So don't start a recruitment drive. That's all I'm saying. The next one of the probably most important one, is that when you're starting out, keep the tiniest scope of the things you're doing. It's too easy to play, games you love and then say, I really want to make something like that. And maybe you'll get to do that eventually, but while you're starting out, just try and think of the smallest idea that is interesting to you and try and develop that. And I know this is hard to do. Like if you're thinking, I want to make games, it's hard to sit down and make a game that in your head is going to be rubbish, like a Pong clone or something like that. But let me assure you that whatever you make is going to be infused with your own styles, your own sensibilities. And even if you sit and make a Pong clone, you could probably sit and make it interesting in a way that is very much you, that nobody else would have made it the same way. So just try and make the smallest games possible, and I'm sure you've got at the back of your mind some big epic project you want to make, and you'll get to that eventually. I keep telling myself that eventually I'll get to my big epic project, but I mean about 5-6 years on, I still haven't got to that because I'm still not quite at that level. And I just think that it's really important to remember that is going to, if you do chase that epic project, you'll probably never finish it, sadly. And if you do finish it, you probably regret it because you did it at the start and you didn't have the skills to achieve it in the way you necessarily wanted to. My next tip is quite specific. It says, and this is that they're not all Braid. I don't know if you've heard of a game called Braid. It's an indie game. It's very big, very popular. And the thing about it is, maybe this tip's slightly out of date, but at the time I felt like there was a lot of indies who saw Braid as a game that had a really interesting, unique angle. And so people would want their first games to be interesting and unique in the same way. I guess this ties into the things I've already said, but the idea is that your games don't all have to be original and amazing. They can just be simple things to get you started and learn the skills you need to express yourself. So don't get wrapped up in the idea that everything you make has to be like this fresh idea nobody's seen or nobody's ever tried before. My last main tip is to ditch the design document. If you've studied it about games or if you read books on it, one of the common themes that comes up is the idea that games come from a design bible, that you sit there and you write 20 to 100 pages and you plan everything out and you make the games based on that. Now that is kind of essential in the AAA industry to some degree because the main industry, you have these huge teams and the only way you're going to coordinate that team is if they've all got a shared resource. But I feel like when you're a small team, you have this advantage that you can just work on something. So you have this advantage that you can just play with something and see where it takes you. Most of my games come from the idea of just sitting and playing around with the tools, with ideas that are interesting to me, and then just seeing, like, when you're actually sat playing a game, you're going to have so much better ideas about what's interesting about it and what to improve, where to take it, than if you're sitting there planning it all out on paper and imagining what it's going to be. It's so much more important to actually. I should start again. I think it's much more important to get your game playable as quickly as possible. Like when I'm starting a new game, I want to have it really roughly playable, like within a few hours, and I will slowly sort of see where it goes from there and find the directions that interest me the most. And that is much better than sitting there planning out this monolithic tomb of your amazing game that you're gonna make. So those are my 5 main tips there. And these are all tips that I wish someone had told me back when I started, because these are all the things I've done wrong over the years. So I'm hoping you guys won't do the same. So one other thing I want to tell you guys is my Game Design 101 course, because there's lots of opinions out there on the internet about game design. There's lots of people with very strong opinions about what's correct, what's not, what type of games are valid, what type of games aren't games, all sorts of discussion. And it's worth reading up on what people have to say. However, my main game design lesson is that there are no rules to game design. There's lots of opinions, there's lots of guidelines, there's lots of ideas, best practices, but there's no hard, fast rules. And anyone who tells you so, I think it is, they're an idiot. Because the thing is, like, even the most basic of rules that you can apply to game design, you can say, like, games should be fun. But that's not actually true, because not all games need to be fun. If you look at a game like Silent Hill, it's a really engaging game, and it's terrifying, it's scary, and it's all these other emotions, but fun isn't the word I would use for my experience playing Silent Hill. So my point is that when you're approaching game design, don't sit there and think, oh, I need to do this, I need to do this. Try and find what you find the most interesting to you. Don't worry about what other people say. This is how games should be. You should try and ignore the voices you don't want to hear and listen to the voices you do want to hear. You be guided by the things that interest you. Make the games that certainly don't make the games you think will necessarily sell the best or you think will reach the audience the best, because if you make a game that you built for an imaginary audience because you thought they would like it, and at the end of it you'll end up with a game that you don't like, and for all you know, because it's very difficult to predict audiences, they might not like either. If you make a game that you're really interested in, whether or not you think anyone will ever play it, at the end of it, even if everyone else in the world hates it, you've made something that you wanted, and that now exists in the world. So it's important just to find your own voice and not get too swayed by what you've played or what other people are saying you should be making or doing. So I said I would get on to tools. So I want to be a bit more practical here and talk about the things you can do. So especially if you're not a coder and that terrifies you, there are some really simple tools. Especially if you're interested in like the storytelling side of video game. I don't know if you are, but if you are interested in the more storytelling side, there's a tool called Twine that's come to popularity recently, and it's for sort of making interactive fiction hypertext stuff. And it's a tool you can learn to use in a matter of minutes. It is so incredibly simple. It's a simple GUI. You drag things about, put text in there, and define the links between the different blocks of text. It really takes minutes to learn, and people are doing some really interesting stuff with it. Stuff that is shockingly good, considering all it is just text and clicking links. But it's a tool that anyone can use, and anyone can use to express themselves. If you want to do something a bit more graphical along the same lines, there's a tool called RenPy, which allows you to make visual novel-style games. Again, it's a little bit more complicated than Twine, but again, it's super simple. You don't have to do actual coding. It's mostly very plain English in the way you write what you want to appear on screen and who you want to say what. And that allows you to do more graphical stuff, but still very story-based. If you actually want to get into more mechanical games, and I guess that's probably a lot of you, then there's a trio, I think, right now of really popular simple game-making tools. One called Game Maker, one called Construct, and one called Stencil. These three tools, there's a lot of different opinions about which one's best, and maybe it's just best to try them all and figure out which one suits you. But all three of them allow you to build games without coding. They allow you to use simple drag-and-drop blocks of logic. And if you want to do that kind of game, you don't need to understand how to code, but you are going to need to understand basic logic, like if player press left, move character left, and things like that. It's all this kind of simple, like when this event happens, do this, and these three engines all are built around that kind of principle. And that's kind of like when you're coding, that's essentially what you're getting at, just the basic logic of how games work. But with Game Maker, Construct, Stencil, all three of these tools allow you to try and make simple games. And I mean, actually, I say simple games, but then again, much bigger and impressive games have been made with them. Game Maker. The original version of Spelunky, which is now on Xbox, the original version of it was made in Game Maker, and there's been lots. I think Hotline Miami at the moment, which is on Steam, that was made in Game Maker as well. There's been lots of really good stuff, because I think you used to have a bit of a reputation that if you use Game Maker, you were only going to make these really noddy, simple games. But actually, you can express yourself just as well with Game Maker as you can writing it all in C++. So if coding is the biggest barrier, and you want to make those type of games, definitely check those three out. I'm reticent to say one's better than the others, because my preference has definitely proved to not be other people's preference in that regard. If you are a bit more codey based, then there are a couple of tools that I could recommend as well. If you do have some knowledge of programming, but you've not actually got into game development, then if you want to do 2D stuff, there's a tool called Flixel, which allows you to output to Flash, and I think they've ported it to various other things, and that's a very popular tool and very easy to use. And my preference, this maybe not, if you're starting out, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one, but I use a tool called Unity. It's a very popular engine now, and it allows you to make games that in C# or JavaScript that can then, and they can be 3D or 2D, and you can port out to everything with it. It's a really popular tool now with indie devs. I'm a bit scared to recommend that though, just because if you're starting out, you've never used game development tools before, Unity is kind of overwhelming, but it's not as overwhelming as just sitting there looking at a C++ prompt and not knowing what to do. So okay, they're the tools I recommend. Don't worry about the names and stuff, because I actually have a website which you can go to later if you want to look these up for yourself. I just brought stuff up so I can't see my screen. Anyway, so as well as the tools, you're going to need the assets for your game. If you're not an artist and a musician, you're probably going to wondering how you're going to account for that, because I've already told you not to form teams, and you can get around this as well. So when it comes to graphics, if you're doing 2D graphics, you've essentially got a couple of options. One is to steal graphics, which I probably shouldn't be telling you to do, but it doesn't matter. Essentially, if you're starting out making games, there's loads of sites on the net that rip sprites from other games, like Mega Man sprites, Mario sprites, or whatever. You could just use those. While you're making your first few games, it doesn't matter if you're stealing artwork. And actually, one of my favourite indie games is called I Want to Be the Guy. It's pretty much entirely ripped art, well, not entirely, but mostly ripped art from other games, and it's still a really wonderful work. But if you don't want to steal other people's art, then just look for a simple way of doing graphics. If you're not an artist, you can get away with a lot of things like using simple geometric shapes or vector lines or ASCII text. And I've seen developers use a whole variety of interesting ways to cover up with the fact they're not a great artist by not trying to do what you can't do. Just do something really simple and try and find a way of expressing yourself that way. That tends to be what I have to do, because I'm not much of an artist either. And the game that's coming to Steam next month, or this month, Cairo, a lot of the design of it was built around the fact that I'm a terrible artist, but I can use these very simple 3D modelling tools to make like huge monolithic architecture, and it's kind of, the game was built around my limitations. So you can get away with a lot without having that ability. Sound, there's a bunch of websites like Freesound. I think freesound.org is probably the main one, where there's huge archives of whatever kind of sounds you want. Just go on there, start search for things, and just mess around with them in an audio editor like Audacity. Or you record your own sounds. It doesn't really matter. Like you're saying, these are your first simple games. Don't let these things be sticking points. And then music. There is a site that is almost a cliche amongst indie developers to use. There's a guy called Kevin MacLeod. He runs a site called Incompetech, and he produces a huge array of free music that anyone's allowed to use in their projects, whether they're commercial or not. And I wouldn't necessarily ship a for sale game using his music, but if you're making simple first games, you're probably going to find he's produced a lot of stuff that will suit exactly what you're looking for. Or you can make your own music. There's tons of music packages. I don't really want to get into listing music packages because there are millions of them, and many of them free, many really powerful stuff free. That's pretty much most of my starting spiel. I just want to reiterate that there's a saying that all advice is autobiographical, and that is definitely true in this case. Everything I'm telling you is the things that I stumbled with when I was making games, and the things that got in the way of me making the type of games I wanted to make. And so this advice is the stuff that I wish I had known back then, and then I probably wouldn't have wasted as many years failing to make games in various forms as I did. And so that's all I had to say in terms of my spiel. Thank you for listening, and if everyone has questions they want to ask, then I'm happy to do my best to see what I can answer for you. So thank you.